Welcome back, Rebel fans. You're listening to another episode of the Rebel Talk presented by the Rebel Walk. I'm Cam Wicker, and as always, I'm here with Zach Moreth. And today we're here to talk a little bit about just the recent week in Ole Miss sports. It's been a pretty good week. If you're an Ole Miss Rebel fan, if you're involved with this university, Ole Miss football team beat Georgia on Saturday. Probably the biggest win in Ole Miss football history. Definitely the biggest win in Lane Kiffin era. Lane Kiffin finally got that signature win that he'd been looking for all throughout his entire career of coaching, and especially while he's been here at Ole Miss. We'll get to talk a little bit more about just what's to come for this Ole Miss team. Won't talk too much about the Georgia game because Zach and Dalen talked about that a little bit earlier this week. But we'll talk about we want to do a little bit of a Big Ten rant. We'll get to that about these Big Ten teams and talk a little bit about just the resume and the strength of schedule and all that stuff, the FPI with Ole Miss in the current day. And we'll also talk a little bit about recruits, another big recruit pickup from Ole Miss today, and the recruiting starting to pick up after that big time win. But first, we'll hop into basketball to start off. Last night, men's basketball beat Southern Alabama. Beat South Alabama at the Tap Pad in the second annual Tap Pad game, honoring Bob Weltlich, former Ole Miss coach in 1976 through 1982. He brought Ole Miss to their first national tournament appearance. Pretty good night for Ole Miss defensively, I would say. I mean, we were talking about that last night, Zach. The defense was there all night. The switching, even in that Grambling State game, if you guys got a chance to watch that one, the defense was there all night. Rotations look good. It's just when you're playing teams like that and the shots are falling, there's not much you can do. I mean, some of these guys were smothered in this Grambling State and South Alabama games, and they were just making shots on Ole Miss defenders. And then on the opposite side of that, the Ole Miss wasn't taking bad shots in these games. Shots just weren't falling at times, especially from behind the arc. In that game last night, other than Sean Padula hitting 7 threes in that game, really just wasn't falling for Ole Miss. But I think the big thing for the men's basketball team right now is just the lack, which not really a lack of size, but when they're playing a bigger team like when we saw it against Grambling State last Friday, it seems like there's a trouble getting inside. And you saw it against South Alabama last night as well against the zone defense. This Ole Miss team is still working on a lot of things. Chris Britt admitted that this team's not as good as they could be right now, that it's going to get better. But he also said that teams aren't going to be, you're looking around the country, other teams, they're not going to be as good as they'll be later on in the year as well. So I think this Ole Miss team is starting to just get used to playing with each other. This is a very experienced Ole Miss team. They're really good on the offensive end. They just have to kind of put it together. But really the thing that I'm just looking forward to the most is watching this defense come together because, like I said, Zach, this defense, the rotations, even Juju Murray got a lot better at defense this year, and seeing Malik Dia go out there on the perimeter, which we didn't see a lot of last year from Ole Miss big man, that was really good to see.
Yeah, an elite team stem with elite defenses, especially when you look at Chris Beard's history. That's kind of what his brand and his motto is for all his teams. I want to take it a little bit off the court. One of the things Chris Beard mentioned in his post-game press conference was that, he wants to see more guys bringing the energy like Duke Lafke does. He wants to see the veterans especially, start to really enhance their leadership skills more vocally. And that's not something I thought you would hear, because there's a lot of guys like Jamin Brakefield, Malik Dia, Nikhil Brown-Jones, older dudes who, they play the game physical and they play the game hard. And you'd expect them to take on a much larger leadership role than you would think, but apparently that's not the case. So definitely look for a little bit more of a culture change on the court, maybe some more emotions being expressed a little bit, not in a negative way. But for example, the example that Beard used was when Duke Lafke made a beautiful pass to Sean Padula, then Padula nailed the three. Lafke was like pumping his fists, yelling, just stuff like that, more positive stuff. But if this team wants to make a run in March, you have to have culture and you need to have it established. That's the brand of Ole Miss basketball right now, and they're lacking it. So it's got to be fixed. It's got to be cleaned up. But again, I'm not concerned. Defense looks amazing, and that's something that needs to be established that, it really wasn't at the beginning of last year. So there's definitely a step forward in that aspect of the game. Points in the paint has been atrocious. It's been hard to get the ball in the paint against a really tight zone defense yesterday. Cam talked about it. But a lot of shots were taken, and some shots were falling and some weren't. And that's going to happen, right? But they continue to win, one game at a time. I'm going to continue to look for some offensive improvements. It is worth noting that Matt Morrell did not play the game yesterday. I know Matt hasn't been in the peak form that we know Matt has been for, in his past years. But still, he's probably the most reliable three-point shooter, or at least the most reliable offensive threat on this team. and he was out yesterday, but Chris Beard fully expects him to be back against Colorado State, I believe, on Saturday. Aside from that, Cam, that's really all I got. There's a lot of things you can dissect here and there, but you have to understand it's really early in the season. It's November, and this team wants to be peaking around January, February, and March. So there's a lot of time and a lot of new faces. You look at Ole Miss football. That's one of the things Lane Kiffin talked about, that the team needs some time to gel. They weren't gelling against Kentucky. And then you host Florida, the team's clicking, things are flowing, and you beat the hell out of them. So I'm just asking the fans to be patient with this. I'm trying my best. But I do think there's a lot of promising things, despite the little itty bitty factors that need to get worked out.
Absolutely, and like you said it best. If you look at this, if you look at the stat sheets, if you look at the score, and you're not really watching these games or going back and watching these highlights, you don't really. You're seeing a close game against Grambling State that you win by 266-64, and then a 10-point win last night in the Tap Pad. Grambling State tournament team, pretty good team. I think they returned 7 players, got a transfer in from NC State too. That's a good team. They'll probably make the tournament this year again. They're really good on the inside in the paint, like you said. Ole Miss struggled against Grambling State in the paint. They struggled last night in the paint against his own defense. South Alabama, you look at their record last year, wasn't as good. I think they were 16-16. Wasn't very good in the Sun Belt Conference either. But it's just like you said, it's early in the season. We're in that transfer portal era. Same thing happened with the football team. Football team's hot right now, and they're getting hot at the right time. If the basketball team can translate any of that, and look what the football team has done with their transfers and slowly built that culture and became a bond as a team over the time, you're going to peak at the right time, and I think that's what Chris Beard is hoping is going to happen with this team, especially with the veteran presence on this team. Zach mentioned as well, Moreth did not play in that game, and you could tell that Ole Miss was missing Moreth in that game. Just at times, it seemed like the offense didn't really know what to do. At times, you got Juju Murray or Padula handling the ball in the front court, and they're kind of just looking around, trying to find someone. But the zone defense kind of just forced them to take shots. And Padula talked about that after the game. They fell in love with the perimeter shots because of the zone defense. I think Padula had close to 23-point attempts on the game, making 7 of them. So he really I guess, propelled Ole Miss to that win with those 7 threes. Chris Beard talked about that after the game too. If you make enough threes in a game like that, then you should win. And Ole Miss did just that. Also out rebounded the opponent. Chris Beard made that a big deal in the press conference after the game, talking about winning the game that way with Malik Dia getting 13 rebounds. I believe Ole Miss out rebounded South Alabama as well by at least 3 or 4 rebounds. And that's something this Ole Miss team struggled with last year. So we're going to see a lot of that this year, of Ole Miss being a rebounding team. We're yet to see if that's going to hold up against the better teams. But I think that, like Zach said, this team has the potential to be peaking at the right time. And they'll head to Colorado State in a neutral site this week in South Haven, which not very neutral for Colorado State. A lot of Ole Miss fans probably going to be there in the Landers Center in South Haven. That's on 3 p.m. That's 3 p.m. on Saturday. Ole Miss will expect to have Matt Morrell for that game, and excited to see where this Ole Miss team is going to be going in the future as the weeks go by and go into SEC play. Moving on to the women's basketball game this past week, fewest points allowed in program history in a win, 85-24 over Arkansas Pine Bluff. Really just a dominant performance. I didn't get a chance to watch this in person. Had to watch it back a little bit on the highlights with the time of day. KK Deans played limited minutes off the bench and still led the team with 16 points. Sierra Chano started in her place, and I have this right here. I think she's one of those high-impact freshmen. Maybe not someone you see like Juju Watkins, but I think Sierra Chano is going to be one of those players this year for Coach O that she relies on, and I think Chano can get that done for Coach O. It seems like she's really good at handling the ball. It seems like she can play the point guard role. It seems like she's kind of one of those Kennedy Todd Williams type players. And going into Kennedy Todd Williams, she had a great game as well. 10 boards, went 1 for 9 from the field. Didn't have a great night shooting, but really what I looked at, and I know a lot of people don't look at this when it comes to basketball unless you're, I guess, a stat freak. Shout out TJ Oxley. I know he's one of those guys. The plus minus for Kennedy Todd Williams in that game, despite going 1 for 9, was plus 41. So having her on the floor, regardless of how she's shooting, she's a game changer. And I think Sierra Chano is one of those type of players as well. Like I said, I think she's going to be high impact for this team moving forward, and I'm excited to see what this women's team is going to do. I think this team has a really high ceiling. I think this is a team that could be top 3 in the SEC again, and I think this is a year that the way that this team is playing right now, the way that you played against USC in France, this is a year that you can compete with South Carolina, LSU, and Texas, who's now just joined the SEC.
Yeah, Cam. And you look at, KK Deans, she's really been just a key factor in, all the games that they've played this year. And it's kind of a shame that she was limited last year, but she's a key player. And this team is showing they've done what a lot of the Ole Miss sports teams have done. They've returned a decent amount of players. They still got portal talent. And like you said, there's freshmen who are starting and doing a really nice job. So, the sky's the limit. And, like I said, for men's, it's still really early. They're not playing the best competition, aside from the USC game at this point moving forward. It's going to be tough to kind of grasp on where they're at, but as long as they keep dominating and collecting wins, that's really all that matters at this point.
Absolutely. They'll be traveling to Delaware State on Thursday. That'll be at 4:30 p.m. Central Time. That'll be 5:30 on the East Coast in Delaware State. That's on Thursday this coming week. And I don't believe they'll have another home game. Well, no, they'll have another home game next week against Jackson State. I think that's Kids Day. It'll be in the morning time. And then after that, Coach Yo and the women's team will head down to the Bahamas, where they had a lot of success last year in that tournament against some pretty good teams early in the season. I think that's all we got for basketball for you guys. So with that, we'll hop into football, hop into a little bit of recruiting before we hop into what's looking like for this Ole Miss team moving forward. Big news today for the Ole Miss program. First five-star receiver committed to the program since Laquan Treadwell. Caleb Cunningham flips from Alabama, Akron, Mississippi guy. And I mean, I don't know if any of you guys have kind of watched this guy play or just seen highlights. You don't even really have to go watch the full huddle clip of this guy's highlights, the 10-minute huddle clip that I have on there. You don't even have to watch that. You can go to his Instagram, you can go to YouTube, and you can just look up his highlights. You can watch this dude play basketball and realize how good of a football player he is. He jumps out of the gym when he plays basketball, and I think that's translates to the football field. You watch his highlights on the football field, he's a really dangerous jump ball threat. It seems like every other play on his highlight reel, they're just throwing it up to him and allowing him to just jump over a lot of guys. I don't know if any of you guys watched any of those Deion Smith highlights when he was at JUCO, but that's what Caleb Cunningham is doing to Mississippi high schools right now. He's making these guys look like they're kids out there, and even though they are, he's making himself look like a grown man out there. And I'm really excited to see what their Ole Miss is going to do with Caleb Cunningham when he comes to campus next year. Obviously, Aiden Williams, last really high recruit. They've had a receiver. We haven't really seen a lot out of him. But then on the other side of that, you have Ryan Williams at Alabama right now putting on a show as a freshman. So if Ole Miss can find a way to get Caleb Cunningham on the field early next year, which I think is pretty possible with the departures that you're expecting to happen in that receiver room next year, then a guy like Austin Simmons is going to love throwing to Caleb Cunningham next year.
Yeah, and look, Cam, you can look at all the wide receivers that Lane Kiffin's coached at Ole Miss, even Quinshon Judkins. These are guys who are 3 stars and 4 stars, either coming from the transfer portal or high school. And what Lane does is he gets the ball in their hands and he essentially propels their entire game. He gets NFL scouts to take a look at them. He puts stats on their resume. He gets the ball in their hands and allows them to make plays. And I think that's a big part of why Caleb Cunningham has decided to come here. He had the option to go to Alabama, but he understands that with Austin Simmons in a Lane Kiffin offense, in addition to playing to your home state, there's a lot more, in my opinion, that was going to be offered to him and a better opportunity. But again, man, you're looking at a 6'3", 190-pound guy. By the time he ends up playing for Ole Miss next year, I think you'll be looking at a similar body shape to Trey Harris, who's about 6'2", 215. I expect them to put about 15 pounds of muscle on this kid over the next year. I would like him to be around 205, being just in the SEC. But, man, this is a day one player, and Cam mentioned it, but you look at Ryan Williams and you look at the kid, Jeremiah Smith from Ohio State. Freshmen are going to play. If they're good enough, Cam, they are going to find their way on the field. And with the losses in the wide receiver room, you better believe that Caleb Cunningham is coming here with the goal to start in this wide receiving core for Austin Simmons. And, man, this is just it's a new era of Ole Miss recruiting, Cam. I want to transition this a little bit into 2 offensive linemen who are currently committed to LSU, Tyler Miller and Devin Harper. Tyler Miller is a high 4-star. He's 6'5", 315 pounds. He's from Laurel, Mississippi, but kind of what gets me excited is Devin Harper, the other LSU offensive line commit. He's 6'4", 305 pounds, an even higher 4-star than the other one, Tyler Miller, but he's from Louisiana. Ole Miss is going to Louisiana and potentially stealing guys who are committed to LSU. I mean, that's unheard of. What we see is these Louisiana guys who early commit to LSU eventually decommit and then commit to LSU. And you saw a huge domino fall with Caleb Cunningham. And after this win over Georgia, I think it's only a matter of time before the two offensive linemen, Tyler Miller and Devin Harper, commit to Ole Miss. And you're looking at a really elite 2025 class. And if you can get them in the top 15 and then go get a top 5 transfer portal class, all of a sudden, let's do the last dance again, man. You're reloaded, you're ready to go, and you're going to be a big time contender in the SEC. So, really, just a credit to Lane Kiffin and Kelvin Bolden, who have done a fantastic job. The last guy I want to touch on a little bit is Dante Core, 6 feet, 185. Wow, I can't talk. Defensive back. Really good offer sheet from Auburn, Mizzou, LSU, bunch of SEC teams. He actually decommitted from Auburn and then committed to Ole Miss in the last couple of days. Look, I know if you look at the recruiting sites, I believe he's a 3-star on almost all of them. But we're at the point now where you kind of just have to trust Pete Golding's evaluations. If you look across this defense, there were some guys in the portal in the secondary. You look at Yam Banks, who Paul really wasn't a huge guy from the portal. If you guys remember, more of the focus is on Walter Nolan and Princely Uman Mielen. TJ Dudley was not a big name. I know there was some controversy, but even so, he didn't really do anything too special. I know he was a 4-star in high school, but it's these evaluations of Pete Golding that he recognizes talent that he can use in his defensive system. And he goes out there and he gets it. So don't be fooled by the stars or the rankings or any of that. Understand that Pete Golding has a process for this, and understand that this guy knows how to build a defense if you're watching what's going on Saturdays.
Absolutely. Before I go back to the offensive lineman, and I want to talk about another guy, Winston Watkins Jr., too. I'm going to talk a little bit about Dante Core first. Like Zach said, you go to recruit sites, you're going to see 3-star. You're going to see that he's not ranked nationally on some recruiting sites. He's only ranked in his state or ranked in his position. But like Zach said, you look at the offer sheet, you see all the SEC offers. You really just got when you have a guy like this, you have to just go watch the tape. I know a lot of people don't. I guess maybe not know football enough to go watch some tape and kind of evaluate these things. But when I look at these 3-stars, Bryson Walters, for example, who's already committed to Ole Miss at linebacker as well. If you go watch the tape on these guys, you just realize why Kiffin and why Pete Golding is recruiting these guys. Watching a little bit of Dante Core highlights, really, from what I can tell, it seems like he has great football IQ. He has great zone skill. He sits in the zone really well, reads the quarterback's eyes, and breaks on the ball really well, which is hard to teach, especially for a young DB. That's kind of like a given talent that you have to have at an early age in order to produce it at a high level. He also has great ball skills. He plays offense a lot for out there in Fort Walton Beach, Florida. He returns a lot of punts for that team as well while playing DB. Slightly undersized for a DB if you're plugging into a Pete Golding type system, but obviously Pete Golding probably put some weight on him. And for an undersized guy, he flies to the football as well. But like Zach said, a lot of SEC offers, a good-looking offer sheet. Flipped from Auburn. Obviously, Auburn wanted him to play. But I believe what Golden does with this defense, especially outside of the defensive line, it seems like when it comes to Pete Golding recruiting, he goes after the very high caliber defensive linemen, and then with the linebackers and the DBs, it's kind of just his preference, who he likes and what type of player he wants to go after. So you have to trust Pete Golding in the system. He's a genius. He's a football guru, and you have to just rely on him that he's going to make the right decisions when bringing some of these guys in, despite the star ranking. Going back to these offensive linemen, before I touch on Winston Watkins Jr. As well. Look, I didn't get much time to watch Tyler Miller, but watched a lot of Devin Harper in the past couple hours and over the past day from Captain Shreve in Shreveport. He's a really, really powerful blocker. He just kind of flattens guys, and whether it's run blocking or pass blocking, he's throwing guys around. He's moving guys with force. He played left tackle for the most part in his film that I could see. 6'4", 305 pounds, probably will move to the inside when he gets to Ole Miss just for size reasons. Obviously, Ole Miss likes to have guys, and these bigger programs like to have guys who are 6'7", light on their feet. But one thing I really liked about Devin Harper in this was when it got to the pass blocking snaps in his film, very light on his feet for 310 pounds, pretty quick guy. And this, like Zach said, getting a guy to flip from LSU, I don't know if you guys know how hard that is to do. If you guys keep up with LSU recruiting, if you go to any of the recruiting sites and you look up the top Louisiana recruits every year. LSU's just taking all these guys.
Yeah.
If you look at the LSU roster, it's full of Louisiana guys. It's very, very difficult to take players away from LSU if they're in the state of Louisiana. And if Ole Miss can go get one of the top offensive linemen, one of the top players in the state of Louisiana, and Devin Harper, that's a very bright future for this Lane Kiffin era of football and recruiting. It seems like it really changed the culture winning that game against Georgia, and that's when I want to talk about Winston Watkins Jr. as well. If you look at Austin Simmons on Twitter or on X at all, he's always recruiting Winston Watkins Jr. He has been for a while. I think he has some type of relationship with Watkins Jr. maybe, or maybe throws to him in the off season maybe. But Winston, was he committed to Ole Miss at one point? Zach, do you know?
Okay, I don't think he was committed to Ole Miss, but I can't think of the school. I'm gonna look it up super quick. He was committed Colorado.
Colorado, yeah. So this is a guy who's been in the mix with Ole Miss for a little while, but hasn't been committed yet. It seems like he's kind of leaning towards that way now. If you look at the social media platforms, you look at all these other people throwing tags at him, it seems like he's kind of leaning towards Ole Miss. And if Ole Miss can land Winston Watkins Jr. along with landing Caleb Cunningham today, the future is bright for Austin Simmons, and that's what I want to talk about as well. You let Austin Simmons play in that Georgia game, obviously in circumstances that you didn't think was going to happen. But good things are coming out of it. I'm sure Caleb Cunningham, a big reason to why he flipped this commitment, because he knows Austin Simmons is the next guy up for Ole Miss. You know you got a guy of that caliber throwing the ball to you. And Winston Watkins Jr. probably sees the same thing sitting at home and watching those games as well.
No doubt. And I think Winston Watkins is going to come in here and be treated as if it's another Caden Lee. Kind of a smaller guy, a slot guy, but really fast and talented. Yeah, he's a Florida boy, just like Austin Simmons. There's no doubt that they have either played with each other or have a good relationship. So I wouldn't be surprised if he ends up in this recruiting class as well. But that was one of the things Cunningham said. You know, he told Lane apparently after the Georgia game that he was coming to play here. And a big part of that was not only Austin Simmons recruiting him, but, you know, I've heard that Jackson Dart and Trey Harris both had like major impacts and sit down conversations with Cunningham. And then you go look at their social media and they're posting about Cunningham and they're hyping him up. And look, you know, he commits to Ole Miss and the job is well done. Another thing on Cunningham, because of basketball, I heard he was originally going to wait until the spring period to get here to Oxford, and I believe it was either On3 or 247, but they posted an article, it was an interview with him, and there's a good chance you might get this kid down here in December, which would be incredible news for Ole Miss. You don't want anyone tampering. Like, you want to get this guy to campus. You want to get him building relationships with the players and the coaching staff and get him involved in your scheme as well. But a really, really, really good week for Ole Miss football. After that win to Georgia, recruiting has been on fire. And like I said, there's a lot of guys out there, Winston Watkins, Tyler Miller, Devin Harper. You keep your eyes out for these people. I would expect Ole Miss to go 3 for 3 there. So exciting times, Cam.
Absolutely. And if you can get Caleb Cunningham in here by December, that's really big time. If you can get him to sit down with Lane Kiffin and Charlie Wise Jr. and just learn this Ole Miss offense a little bit before Austin Simmons takes the field in the spring, we'll have to see how that goes. Obviously, baseball for Austin Simmons. He'll probably be out there on the diamond this year as well, but I'm sure we'll see Austin Simmons in the spring game or in spring practice for Ole Miss at some point in football. Hopefully throwing to Caleb Cunningham during the spring as well. Before we move into our Big Ten rant, I wanted to talk a little bit about just the playoff rankings last night, the bye week for Ole Miss right now. Didn't watch the playoff rankings last night, or if you didn't really get on social media all day, Ole Miss is 11th in the college football playoff ranking that was released last night. If everything would hold or everything started today, that matchup will be against Penn State. Obviously, pretty ideal for Ole Miss considering the win against them last year in the Peach Bowl against a pretty similar Penn State team to last year. They really didn't lose a lot of guys, brought back a lot of that team, including Drew Aller as well. But I believe if Ole Miss were to match up against a team like Penn State, it'd be pretty similar probably to the Peach Bowl last year. Looking at some of the rest of the SEC, Georgia's sitting back there at 12, Bama at 10, and Tennessee at 7. So a lot of SEC teams in the mix here. And if you look around, there's so many scenarios that could happen with this SEC championship game. If you're an Ole Miss fan or if you're a follower of Ole Miss, you probably don't want Ole Miss to be in an SEC championship game. As a fan myself, I personally wouldn't want to see Ole Miss be in the SEC championship game just because if you're that third team, you're pretty much in. You pretty much have your spot. You don't really want to play another game if you don't have to. Obviously, you can go in there and win an SEC championship game. That's big time. But if you don't have to play it and still get in the playoffs, that's pretty ideal, if I had to say so myself, Zach. Ole Miss is fifth in the FPI. Committee looks at these stats a lot. Ole Miss has a 75% chance to win out the rest of their schedule. That's the highest amongst everyone else in the country. 12th best strength of record and 23rd best strength of schedule, higher than a lot of other teams such as like Texas and Tennessee on there as well. Better strength of schedule also than every other big team in the playoff picture.
Yeah, let's get into this, man. Indiana and Penn State. I want everyone who's listening to this to please go and look up their schedules. It hurts me, Cam. And I live in Big Ten country up there in Chicago. I came to the SEC because I came for competitive football, and to really go to a football school at Ole Miss, to avoid going to a school like that. Penn State and Indiana have 0 ranked wins, Cam. Penn State's best win against 6-3 Illinois at home. Indiana's best win is against either, I think, 5-4 Nebraska or 500 Michigan. There's a problem with the Big Ten. It is ridiculously uncompetitive. I don't know how this happened, because if you look at the SEC, it's kind of the complete opposite. I understand, there's a group that's at the top and the bottom isn't so great. But, you have Vanderbilt knocking off teams. South Carolina's starting to creep up. LSU's sitting at the bottom of the top 25. And then at the top, you have your Texas, your Georgia, your Ole Miss, your Alabama. And I get it, right? You can make the argument that Texas hasn't played anyone. But if you look at the rest of the SEC in ranked games, Alabama has played 5 ranked games. Like, 5. Ole Miss has played 3. Georgia's played 4. Oregon and Ohio State at the top of the Big Ten. Ohio State has played 2 ranked games. Oregon has also played 2 ranked games.
One of those against each other.
Correct. That's about it. Like, it's really hard for me to just look at the bracket here when you have Alabama going to Indiana. Are you serious? What do you think is going to happen in Bloomington on that day? True, honest to God, can you look at the bracket and say that's going to be a good game? And I know Penn State fans were getting hostile on Twitter last night. I didn't even want to engage in that. But if Ole Miss goes to Happy Valley, I think they're going to kick their ass again. I know it's biased. But these are teams who haven't played anyone. And Ole Miss has one of the weaker schedules in the SEC, and they still played on the road at LSU. They still hosted Georgia, who should be back-to-back national champions. They have to go play in a really tough environment in the swamp. Like, they played at South Carolina, who's now a top 25 team, in a really hard environment at Willie B. So the differences are night and day, and I'm praying to God this somehow gets sorted out. It's really confusing. You could have a situation with a bunch of 2-loss SEC teams, and the committee, they're in a tough spot, Cam. I mean, I thought this was going to help sort this out with the 12 teams instead of the 4, but it appears that it's made it a lot more difficult. That's just my thoughts. It's no disrespect to the Big Ten. I just don't appreciate the respect that they're getting because of their schedules, when in reality, their schedules are extremely weak compared to the other SEC teams.
Absolutely. And I think, like you said, the committee is going to be in a tough spot. Obviously, Ohio State still has to play Indiana. That's going to be Indiana's first ranked matchup of the year. If Indiana gets blown out of that game, I think you have no choice but to bump Indiana out of the college football playoffs. If they're not competitive in that game, you can't put them in. And that's like try not to leave Zach hanging here. I'll go on a personal level too. Looking at the Big Ten, if you're talking about sitting the SEC and the Big Ten right beside each other, it's just Indiana, Oregon, Penn State, Ohio State. And out of those 4 teams, probably just Ohio State and Oregon have a real shot at making noise in the playoffs. I mean, this is a Penn State team that does this every year. This is a Penn State team that has always been on the brink of the 14 playoff because really the strength of schedule just hasn't been there. And you lose a game to Ohio State, or you lose a game they're not supposed to, and all of a sudden Penn State's still hanging around because they're 11-1 or 10-2. I think Penn State is a good football team, but I don't think they're at the same level as the top of the SEC. Same with Indiana. There's just not enough evidence there for Indiana. Obviously, a winning coach. You have a good defense right now, but you still have Ohio State left on the schedule. You still have a lot to prove. Oregon is the only team that I really can say right now in the Big Ten, not even really Ohio State, that I think it has a real shot at being the national champion this year. Oregon has a pretty good defense. Obviously, Dylan Gabriel can do good things for that Oregon offense sometimes. But Oregon has had their struggles as well. Opened the season 24-14 win over Idaho. Struggled against Boise State, which obviously Boise State is probably going to be that Group of 5 team. But if Boise State has to head to someone early in the season, early in the playoffs as the 12th seed and go to a team like Bama or go to a team like Georgia or Tennessee and play on the road in an SEC environment like that, it's just tough for me to think that Boise State's going to be able to hang around. Obviously, yes, Boise State hung around against Oregon, but we're talking about an SEC environment in the playoffs in December. Do we really think a team like Indiana or a team like Boise State is going to be able to go in one of these SEC environments and knock off one of these teams? I don't think so.
No. And I was talking to my buddy about this, shout out to him if he's listening, but I really am not liking the whole Group of 5 thing. I understand it. You have to get them in there, I guess, according to the logic of the committee. But if you look at the bracket right now, Boise State is going to Columbus to play Ohio State. Do you think Boise State would have a better matchup against Ohio State? Or do you think the real 12 seed of Georgia would have a better chance against Ohio State? And to me, that's a problem because I think Boise State goes into Columbus and quite honestly gets demolished. But if Georgia goes in there, it's a completely different feeling. The game's actually competitive. And not only would you draw more viewers, but the game would get more attention. It'd be closer. Again, I don't have the rule or the ownership to change any of these rules. That's just my opinion. And I'm praying to God that this all sorts itself out. In terms of the Ole Miss perspective, I have firm confidence that if you win out, you're going to end up in this playoffs, whether you're hosting a game or not. At this point, the goal should be to get in, especially when you look at the teams who might be hosting a game. So,
absolutely. If you're Ole Miss, you're looking at the rest of the college football playoffs this week. Obviously, Ole Miss has the bye. A lot better feeling with this bye week than the last one. Obviously, you lose to LSU going into the last bye week, and you get the biggest win in program history going into this bye week. If you're Ole Miss, you're taking a close look at what Notre Dame is going to do for the rest of the season. Obviously, Notre Dame ranked ahead of Ole Miss at the number 8 spot. I believe Notre Dame's in that category of those fraudulent teams as well. You have a team that lost to NIU, but beat Texas A&M and also just blew Navy out of the water. They're going to play Virginia this upcoming week, and then they're going to play Army at home, who's also ranked. We'll have to see how Army matches up, who I think, if you ask me, I haven't watched a lot of Army-Navy football this year, but looking just at stats and highlights and stuff that I've seen, I think Army is the better of the two, so maybe we'll see a little bit more of a competitive game there for Notre Dame. But I think they're also on upset watch. They're heading to Southern California to end the year against the USC Trojans. So I think that's a game that you're kind of rooting for USC if you're an Ole Miss fan and hoping that that Notre Dame gets bumped out. And if you're an Ole Miss fan, you may possibly get to see a home playoff game in year one of the 12-team playoffs. Obviously, Georgia and Tennessee play this weekend. I really don't know what to say about that, Zach. I don't know who I really want to win that game.
Yep.
Obviously, Georgia wins that game. Tennessee probably gets bumped out. Tennessee wins that game. Georgia probably gets bumped out. The thing is, if we talked about this last night, Zach, if Georgia wins that game by a convincing amount or maybe even just by a little bit, there's a chance the committee jumps Georgia over Ole Miss again.
Correct.
Who knows?
And at the same time, Cam, it's if Tennessee goes to Athens without their starting quarterback, who is rumored to be questionable, and they lose in a close game, what do you do with Tennessee? Because then the argument is, oh, they would have beat Georgia with their starting quarterback. That shouldn't even matter. And you're going to get an earful of that from, the Vol Nation up there in Knoxville, excuse me. But it's just it's so confusing, dude. So we'll see. If you're an Ole Miss fan, you want Nico to play because even, if Tennessee loses, they're out. So you probably want Nico to play. That way, if Georgia does jump you, you're not going to get kicked out of the playoffs because you have to keep this 11 seed. But if Nico doesn't play, it's a really interesting situation and definitely one to keep your eyes on in terms of how the result in the end of that game. But yeah, this will all be sorted out next Tuesday night. It sucks that Ole Miss doesn't play because you can't really argue their spot to whether to go up or down. But the most important thing is that you go to Gainesville and then you wrap it up here in Oxford after the bye week and go 2-0.
Obviously, have to wait to see what Ole Miss does to win out the season. That's really just the main objective. If you're if you're an Ole Miss fan right now, you want this team to just win out and just let the cards fall in order there. You have to just assume that chaos is going to take place with all that's going on in college football this year, especially in the SEC. You have to assume that someone's probably going to get upset in these last couple weeks of play. In order for Ole Miss to somehow make it to an SEC championship game, I think I seen something earlier today from I can't remember who posted it. It might have been Borky, but I can't remember off the top of my head. But it was something about if a bunch of teams lose and Georgia and LSU were to win out, Georgia and LSU might make the SEC championship.
Yeah,
which would be crazy.
LSU's still in the mix. Like
LSU is still in the mix. This is very, very wide range of things that can happen in the SEC. If you're Bama, if you're Ole Miss, you're probably hoping Tennessee loses this weekend and Nico plays, like Zach says. You probably hope for Bama and Texas to win out the rest of their games, and then they have to play each other in the SEC championship game. But who knows? Bama has to play Oklahoma, I believe, on the road. Don't really know how Oklahoma's looking at this point in the season, but that's a game that Alabama's not promised to win. They also have to play Auburn in the Iron Bowl. Texas has to play Texas A&M to end the year. It's going to be a weird into the season. It's going to be probably some games that you're expecting teams like Bama, Texas, Tennessee, Georgia to win, and some of them might lose. You can't really expect Ole Miss to go into Gainesville and beat Florida, even though they should. You can't really expect Ole Miss to beat Mississippi State in the Egg Bowl, even though they should.
Right.
It's a weird year in college football, and it's just hard to tell what's going to happen. I guess the only thing that you're really scared of if you're an Ole Miss fan right now is if you look at the playoff percentage chances, Ole Miss is the 13th team that has the best chance of making the playoffs. Not very great considering you beat Georgia, and Georgia's a lot farther ahead of you in that percentage ranking, so it's kind of hard to take that with any type of truth. But like me and Zach keep telling you guys, you just kind of have to wait and see where all the chips fall in order at the end of the season.
Exactly. And I said it, but it's kind of going to suck this weekend not having that control or knowing that Ole Miss doesn't win a game that could potentially boost their ranking. But just be patient, hope that they stay in this top 11 funnel of teams and then go do your job and win out. And I think the chips will fall into place.
Absolutely. We appreciate you guys listening to us rant about this Big Ten, a little bit different of a podcast this week with the bye week, and then having Zach and Dylan recap the Georgia game a couple of days ago. So me and Zach kind of got to sit down and just rant about the things that we talk about off camera a lot today. So that's all we got for you guys for this week. Probably won't see you guys again until we get ready to start previewing that Florida matchup next week. They'll be heading to Gainesville next week on the 23rd, next Saturday. That'll be 11 a.m. kickoff on ABC for Ole Miss. DJ Lagway will probably be playing in that game, so Ole Miss will have to prepare for that. But Princely will be returning home to a team that he doesn't really seem to have a lot of good memories about. So we'll have to see what Princely and the rest of that Ole Miss defense can do, building off of that tremendous Georgia performance in that win just this past Saturday. Also keep up with the Ole Miss basketball team. Like I said, women's basketball plays Delaware State in Delaware this Thursday, tomorrow at 4:30 p.m. Central Time. And then obviously the basketball team will go to South Haven this weekend to play the neutral site against Colorado State at 3 p.m. I believe that's all we got for you guys this week. Make sure to stay tuned to the Rebel Walk for all your Ole Miss sports needs.